Some stories come to us like whispers carried by the wind, too strange and too beautiful to ignore. This is one of them. It began on a freezing night in late November, under the shadow of a forgotten bridge outside the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. A woman of 72, her hair silver and tangled, her coat too thin for the sharp bite of the cold, curled herself against the concrete. No one knew her name that night. No one stopped to ask. To most passers-by, she was just another shadow in a town that liked to keep its eyes forward, away from reminders of poverty and misfortune. But in the darkness, while the Susquehanna River moved below her like a restless serpent, she whispered prayers. They weren't polished prayers like the ones you'd hear in church. They were ragged, broken, half-forgotten words from childhood. She spoke them to no one she could see, but she felt eyes upon her. That night, she dreamed she was being watched by a woman clothed in blue light, a motherly figure with eyes full of sorrow and love. Millbrook wasn't the kind of place where miracles happened. It was a coal town once, later a farming hub, but by the 21st century, it was little more than a dot on the map, a place where families clung to old traditions, where every corner store carried statues of saints and every diner waitress had a rosary dangling from her rearview mirror. Folks in Millbrook believed in God, but they also believed in minding their own business. And yet, that winter, something began to stir. It started with her, the old woman under the bridge. She would later tell her story in a trembling voice, how the Virgin Mary came to her in a dream, touched her weathered hand, and said, "You are not forgotten." But that night she was only a shivering figure in the cold, waiting for morning. People in town had noticed her in passing. Children whispered about the bridge lady who slept among cardboard and plastic bags. Farmers driving by in their trucks shook their heads. Some folks at St. Agnes Catholic Church muttered that the pastor ought to do something, but no one did. Nobody wanted to bring a stranger into their home, not in these times. Still, the bridge had its own history. Long before the interstate was built, that very crossing had been the site of a wooden chapel. In the 1880s, immigrants from Italy and Poland prayed there after long shifts in the mines. They said a statue of the Virgin Mary once stood at the chapel, and one harsh winter when the river froze and the town starved, families lit candles before her feet, and the ice broke. Fish spilling into their nets as if heaven had fed them. Most folks forgot that story, though a handful of old-timers remembered. They said the bridge was still holy ground, though paved with steel and tar. And now, a woman with nothing but her breath and her prayers had laid herself down upon it. That week, strange things began to happen in Millbrook. A farmer's cow gave birth to twins, both marked with a white patch shaped like a star. A boy in school fell into the river and should have drowned, but swore he saw a lady under the water who lifted him to shore. And late at night, several drivers reported swerving near the bridge because they thought they saw a woman clothed in blue walking across it. Some said it was the old woman. Others swore it was someone else entirely. Either way, people started talking, and once the town began to talk, they could not stop. The town of Millbrook sat cradled between rolling hills and winding back roads, the kind of place where most people's roots went back 3 or 4 generations. The seasons marked people's lives more than clocks or calendars. In spring, there were barn dances and church picnics. In summer, fields of corn and soybeans hummed with cicadas. By fall, the forest turned to fire, and in winter, snow buried every rooftop until Millbrook looked like something painted on a Christmas card. It was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody, or thought they did. Outsiders stood out like a patch in a quilt. So the sight of the old woman under the bridge unsettled folks. She didn't belong to any family they could name. She wasn't one of their own. People speculated. Some whispered she might be a runaway from a nursing home in Harrisburg. Others said she had once been a school teacher who lost her mind after her husband died. The children had crueler ideas. They called her a witch, daring each other to sneak near the bridge at night and toss pebbles in her direction. But not everyone dismissed her. Father Thomas, the pastor at St. Agnes, drove past the bridge one grey afternoon and saw her crouched near a small fire of sticks and paper. He pulled over, his breath clouding in the cold. "My child," he said, though she was older than him, "do you need shelter?" The woman looked up at him with eyes the color of faded denim. Her face was lined like a dried riverbed. She smiled faintly and said, "I am sheltered." Then she looked toward the river, as if listening to something only she could hear. He tried again, offering to bring her food, but she shook her head. "The mother feeds me," she whispered. Father Thomas went home uneasy. He told himself she was simply confused, maybe delirious. Yet when he lay down that night, he dreamed of a woman cloaked in blue standing on the bridge. She looked at him with tears on her cheeks and said, "Do not turn away." He woke with his heart pounding. The next day, townsfolk began reporting small misfortunes. A bakery's oven broke down on the morning of a wedding order. The mechanic's wife fell suddenly ill, though doctors found nothing wrong. A string of dogs howled through the night, so loud people swore they couldn't sleep. Some said it was just coincidence. Others pointed to the woman under the bridge, saying her presence had stirred something holy or something dangerous. Old Mrs. Kowalski, who lived near the river, told her granddaughter that when she was a child, her grandmother had warned her never to mock the Virgin statue, the one that once stood at the chapel by the bridge. "She helps the poor," the grandmother had said. "She punishes the proud." By Sunday, the pews of St. Agnes buzzed with whispers. Father Thomas gave his sermon on compassion, but his words were drowned by rumor. And when church ended, instead of going home for roast dinners, people lingered in groups in the parking lot, their eyes drifting toward the bridge. That evening, the woman under the bridge, still unnamed, still wrapped in rags, was seen kneeling on the icy ground, her hands folded. The moon hung low and pale, and some who passed swore that around her head glowed a faint circle of light, like a crown. One man, a truck driver named Hal, scoffed when his wife told him. But the next day, while hauling timber through town, his brakes failed. His truck should have jackknifed off the road, crushing him beneath the weight. Yet somehow, impossibly, the rig came to a stop inches from disaster. Hal swore he saw in that last instant a figure standing in front of the truck, holding out her hands. "She was real," he told the men at the diner, trembling as he stirred his coffee. "She saved me." And just like that, belief began to spread through Millbrook like fire through dry grass. But not everyone welcomed it. Some said the woman was bringing false visions, leading people astray. Others feared that miracles always came with a price. And deep down, even the faithful wondered, what was she doing there under the bridge? Why now, after all these years? The answer, though hidden, was already moving toward them, like the river beneath the bridge, unstoppable, unstoppable. By the second week of December, Millbrook seemed to live in two worlds at once. On the surface, daily life went on. Farmers fed their cattle, children rehearsed Christmas plays at school, and the hardware store strung up its usual red and green lights. But underneath, people whispered about the bridge and the woman who slept there. The sheriff, a man named Earl Duggan, finally decided to drive out and see for himself. He was a practical man, more comfortable with paperwork and traffic stops than with mysteries. He carried a thermos of coffee and an old flashlight. When he stepped down under the bridge, he found her sitting upright against the cold stone, her blanket pulled tight. "You can't stay here, Mom," he told her. "It's not safe. Temperatures drop and there's folks saying things." Her eyes lifted toward him. They were calm, almost too calm. "It is not I who am unsafe," she answered softly. "It is the town." Sheriff Duggan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She didn't explain. Instead, she held out her hand as though offering him something invisible. He didn't take it. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the bridge, rattling the beams. He swore the air smelled of roses. Though there were no flowers for miles, he left shaken, muttering to himself that the woman was a lunatic. But when he drove home, he nearly collided with a deer that darted across the road. In that split second, he saw again that faint glow, like a lantern in the dark, standing between him and disaster. That night, townsfolk gathered at the Bluebird Diner, as they often did. The talk turned to the woman. A young waitress, Jenny, spoke of seeing her kneeling with a rosary that seemed to shine. Old men remembered stories their grandmothers told of the Virgin appearing in Europe to shepherd children. A few folks rolled their eyes, insisting Millbrook wasn't Lourdes or Fatima. It was just a tired American town. But as they argued, the power flickered. The lights in the diner went out for a full 5 minutes. And during that silence, several customers claimed they heard singing, not on the jukebox, not from anyone inside, but outside, drifting faintly through the snowy air. A woman's voice, low and sorrowful, like a lullaby. When the power returned, people sat staring at each other, pale and uneasy. Jenny swore she'd seen frost on the windows form into the shape of a woman's face. By the following day, word had spread to nearby towns. Curious drivers pulled off the highway just to glimpse the bridge. Some brought candles, leaving them at the stone abutments as though it were a shrine. Others jeered, calling it superstition. Father Thomas watched with worry. The church was cautious about claims of miracles. He remembered what he had dreamed, but he also feared false hope could damage souls. Yet even as he prayed for guidance, the old woman's voice echoed in his mind, "The mother feeds me." On the third Sunday of Advent, he looked out at his congregation and saw a hunger in their eyes. They weren't only waiting for Christmas anymore, they were waiting for something bigger, something holy to break into their world. And under the bridge, the woman whispered her prayers, her breath rising like smoke into the frigid night, as if she knew the time was near. The night of December 18th brought a storm unlike any Millbrook had seen in years. Snow fell so heavy the streets vanished. The river swelled with ice floes, groaning against the bridge. Power lines snapped and whole neighborhoods went dark. Most families huddled by fireplaces or lanterns, but a few souls, braver or more foolish, ventured toward the bridge to see if the old woman had survived the storm. Among them was Jenny, the waitress, who carried a flashlight and a thermos of hot soup. She expected to find the woman frozen or buried. Instead, she saw her sitting upright, hands clasped, her lips moving steadily in prayer. Around her the snow seemed untouched, almost melted, as if a circle of warmth surrounded her body. Jenny dropped the thermos in shock. "How are you not frozen to death?" she gasped. The old woman opened her eyes. "The mother keeps me." Jenny felt tears sting her face. She knelt beside her, clutching her own rosary from her purse. Together, in the howling wind, they prayed. And Jenny swore she saw, above the bridge, a faint figure outlined in light. Mary herself, cloak billowing, eyes gentle yet fierce, watching them. Word of Jenny's vision spread quickly. The next morning, once the storm had cleared, dozens of townsfolk trudged through snow to the bridge. They found candles still burning, untouched by wind. They found the old woman alive and unshaken. And some claimed to smell roses in the freezing air, but not all were convinced. Sheriff Duggan warned Father Thomas that hysteria could spiral. Outsiders were already arriving, hoping for miracles. Vendors appeared, selling cheap plastic rosaries from their cars. A man from Philadelphia shouted about prophecy, demanding donations. The town teetered between awe and chaos. Then came the warning. That night, several people dreamed the same dream. The Virgin Mary standing on the bridge, her hands outstretched, weeping. Behind her, the river rose higher and higher, as if ready to swallow the town. In the dream, she spoke only one sentence: "Do not mock what is holy." When morning came, people awoke trembling, and by noon, someone had defaced the church statue of Mary outside St. Agnes, spray-painted with cruel words across her robe. Father Thomas stared at the vandalized statue, his stomach twisting. He knew the town was standing on a knife's edge. Either a miracle would soon shake them to their core, or a punishment. And under the bridge, the old woman lay quietly in her blanket, her face turned upward, as if waiting for the sky to open. The morning after the vandalism, Millbrook woke unsettled. People gathered outside St. Agnes, whispering in hushed tones at the sight of the statue's desecration. The blue paint slashed across the Virgin's face seemed almost like blood, like an open wound on something sacred. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Old men clenched their jaws, muttering about how things like this never happened in the old days. Father Thomas stood before the statue, his breath visible in the cold air, his hands trembling around a rag and a bucket of water. He scrubbed at the paint, but it only smeared, seeping deeper into the cracks of the stone. Behind him, he heard murmurs. "This is a sign. She warned us." The dreams were true. Some townsfolk believed punishment was near. Others scoffed, saying vandals were to blame, not heaven. Yet deep down, even the skeptics felt unease prickling under their skin. That evening, the town's mechanic, Jim Halpin, whose wife had fallen mysteriously ill days before, confessed something to his neighbor. He admitted that he had once mocked the Virgin's statue as a boy, throwing stones at it in mischief. "I never thought twice," he said, his eyes heavy with regret. "But ever since, nothing in my life has gone right. Maybe I cursed myself." Word spread like wildfire. Old sins resurfaced. Old memories stirred. People recalled moments of irreverence, moments of pride, and wondered if this was why Millbrook was trembling now. Meanwhile, under the bridge, the old woman prayed harder than ever. Her voice, though weak, carried across the river like a hymn. Children dared to sneak closer to hear her words. One boy swore that when he knelt beside her, his chronic cough disappeared by morning. Another girl claimed that when she gave the woman half her sandwich, she dreamed that night of a radiant lady who promised, "Your kindness will be repaid 100-fold." The bridge had become a shrine, though no official declared it so. Candles lined the concrete. Flowers, frozen stiff, were left by strangers' hands. But not everyone came to pray. Some came to mock. Teenagers from a nearby town arrived late one night, laughing, carrying beer. They taunted the old woman, calling her crazy, throwing empty bottles into the river. She did not answer. She only prayed. But as they left, their truck slid on the icy road, crashing into a ditch. None were killed, but each swore, shaking, that a figure in blue had appeared in the headlights just before they veered off, staring at them with sorrow. The sheriff found the wreck the next morning. The boys were pale, unable to explain what they saw, but one whispered to him, "She wasn't angry, she was sad, like she was crying for us." And that night, the whole town heard the church bells ring at midnight, though no one had touched them. The sound echoed through the valley, long and mournful, calling everyone from their sleep. Father Thomas fell to his knees in his rectory, whispering through tears, "Holy Mother, what do you want from us?" The days leading to Christmas grew darker, though the calendar said the light should be returning. Millbrook's people walked with unease, their conversations hushed, their eyes often drawn toward the bridge as though it were the heart of the town now. On December 21st, the winter solstice, a group of parishioners organized a rosary procession to the bridge. They carried lanterns through the snow, voices trembling in song. The old woman joined them, her frail figure moving with surprising strength. She led the prayers, her cracked voice carrying a conviction that hushed even the rowdiest children. As they prayed, the river churned. Ice broke apart, though the night was bitter cold. Some said they saw shapes in the water, shapes like hands reaching upward, then dissolving. Fear rippled through the crowd, but the woman raised her hand and said firmly, "She is with us." And just like that, the waters calmed. The next morning, a farmer named Cole discovered his barn had burned down overnight. No storm, no lightning, no accident he could see. His cattle were safe. Strangely safe, as though they'd been led out before the fire started. But in the ashes of the barn, he swore he found the faint outline of a woman's figure scorched into the ground. "This is her warning," he told the others at the diner. "She's telling us to repent." By then, the woman under the bridge had become a mystery no one could ignore. Father Thomas finally asked her name. She hesitated, her eyes distant, then whispered, "My name was Margaret once, but names don't matter anymore. Only the mother matters." That name, Margaret, echoed through the town. Old records were searched. People speculated about who she had been. Some thought an abandoned widow, others believed she had once belonged to a religious order. But nothing could be proven. She remained both known and unknown, familiar yet otherworldly. On Christmas Eve, something happened that would seal the town's belief. During midnight mass at St. Agnes, the power failed. The church sank into darkness, the only light coming from the altar candles. At that moment, several children gasped, pointing toward the stained glass window of the Virgin. Though the moon was hidden by clouds, the glass glowed from within, the Virgin's face illuminated as if lit by heaven itself. Gasps filled the pews. Mothers wept. Fathers crossed themselves. Father Thomas's voice shook as he whispered, "Hail Mary, full of grace." And the entire congregation joined in. After Mass, the old woman returned to her bridge, but those who followed swore they saw her standing not alone, but beside another figure, a tall, radiant woman clothed in blue, her veil glimmering in the night. The two figures turned toward the crowd, and then the light was gone. Only Margaret remained, kneeling, whispering prayers that sounded older than time itself. The town of Millbrook had reached a point of no return. Whatever was happening was real, or at least real enough that no one dared doubt it anymore. But as the year turned toward its end, so too did the signs grow stronger and darker. The first week of the new year brought no relief. Snow weighed heavy on Millbrook's rooftops, the river ran dark and fast, and whispers traveled faster than both. No one could agree whether the Virgin's presence was a blessing or a warning. Some townsfolk became more devout than ever, flocking to church daily, lighting candles in the cold. Others grew fearful, whispering that perhaps their sins were being counted, that punishment loomed. Father Thomas tried to hold the balance. He reminded them of mercy, of hope, of Christ's promise that light would triumph over darkness. But even he felt something pressing down on Millbrook, like a storm about to break. And then came the second desecration. On January 6th, Epiphany, townsfolk entered St. Agnes to find that the crucifix above the altar had fallen. The cross itself lay splintered on the ground. No storm had come through, no thief had broken in. Yet there it was, shattered where it had hung for 100 years. Some people gasped in terror, others wept openly. "It's happening again," someone whispered. "She warned us." Father Thomas gathered his courage and led prayers, but his hands shook. When he looked toward the front pews, he saw Margaret sitting silently, her eyes lowered, as if she already knew this would happen. That evening, people gathered at the bridge once more. Candles flickered in the snow, smoke curling into the icy air. Margaret rose slowly to her feet. "You have mocked the holy," she said, her voice frail yet strong. "But the Mother has not abandoned you. She weeps for you. She waits for you." Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the bridge, nearly snuffing out every candle. But instead of darkness, the flames grew brighter, flaring as though unseen hands shielded them. A smell of roses spread once more, thick and undeniable. Even the skeptics fell to their knees. That night, several townsfolk dreamed again. This time, the Virgin stood not weeping, but holding out her arms, beckoning. Behind her, the river rose higher and higher until it swallowed the fields, the barns, the streets. But when the people in the dream ran toward her, she lifted them onto dry ground. In the morning, the river indeed ran dangerously high. Ice cracked and groaned, threatening to flood the valley. People began to whisper that unless Millbrook repented, disaster would strike. By then, Margaret had become more than the bridge lady. She was seen as chosen, fragile, poor, nearly forgotten, yet closer to heaven than all of them. Some said she was a prophet. Others whispered she was already half saint, kept alive only by grace. But even prophets suffer. Margaret grew weaker, her steps slower, her hands trembling more each day. "It is not my strength you see," she told those who worried. "It is hers." And one bitter night, as the town held a candlelight vigil at the bridge, the sky above them filled with strange light. No northern lights had ever been seen so far south, yet ribbons of green and gold shimmered across the heavens. "Look," children cried, "she's here!" And in the midst of that light, for a heartbeat, many swore they saw her, the Virgin herself, walking across the sky as if it were a field of stars. From that night onward, Millbrook could no longer hide from the world. News traveled, first through neighboring towns, then to regional papers, and soon reporters began arriving with cameras and notebooks. They asked questions, demanded interviews, and lingered at the diner, pressing locals for details. Some townsfolk welcomed the attention, hoping the story would bring visitors and money. Others hated it, fearing outsiders would cheapen what was holy. Margaret stayed quiet. She neither sought attention nor shunned it. She simply kept praying under her bridge, her fragile frame hunched against the cold. To those who asked her questions, she gave the same answer. "It is not I you seek, it is the mother." Reporters scoffed. Some mocked. One even laughed openly, asking her if she thought she was a saint. Margaret only smiled sadly and said, "No saint sleeps on stone, but even the least of us can be lifted." That night, the mocking reporter fell ill with a fever so sudden he was rushed to the hospital. He survived, but in his dreams he claimed a woman in blue had visited him, laying a cool hand on his brow, whispering, "Mock not the lowly." When he returned weeks later, he was a changed man, silent, respectful, humbled. Still, tensions in Millbrook grew. People argued in the diner and outside the church. Was this truly the Virgin, or was it madness? Was Margaret holy or delusional? One evening, a fight even broke out. Two men shoved each other outside the gas station, shouting about whether the visions were divine or devilish. Their shouts carried down the street, echoing like thunder, and just then the sky split open with lightning, though the night was clear. A single bolt struck the empty field beside them, burning the grass in the shape of a cross. They dropped their fists instantly. No one spoke. By now, even the sheriff had stopped trying to dismiss the events. He admitted privately to Father Thomas that he believed something real was happening, something too big for him to contain. But if the Virgin was present, why? To save them? To warn them? To punish them? The answer came slowly, like dawn rising through Margaret's own weakening body. On January 15th, she collapsed in prayer. Those who rushed to her side thought she was dead. But when she opened her eyes again, she whispered, "She is coming." They asked who. Margaret's cracked lips curved into the faintest smile. "The Mother of Sorrows," she said. "She will weep for this town, and in her weeping you will see the truth." The words sent chills through every spine. No one knew what they meant, but everyone felt it. Something great and terrible was drawing near. That night, the bells of St. Agnes rang again at midnight, though the tower was locked. The sound rolled over the valley, solemn, unearthly, like a funeral toll for something not yet lost, and the people of Millbrook knew, whether they wanted it or not, the moment of reckoning was almost upon them. On the night of January 22nd, the river rose higher than anyone had seen in decades. Ice cracked like cannon fire. Families dragged sandbags to their doorsteps, children crying as they watched the waters lap at the edges of the town. At the bridge, a crowd gathered, despite the danger. They brought lanterns, rosaries, and trembling voices. Margaret was already there, kneeling in her usual place, her breath faint in the cold air. She seemed weaker than ever, her body bent, her hands shaking, yet her eyes shone with a strange fire. "She is here," she whispered, though no one else saw anything. Father Thomas stood at her side, clutching his rosary, whispering prayers under his breath. The sheriff, his hat pulled low against the wind, hovered nearby with a face pale as stone. Families huddled together, watching the river swell, listening to the ice groan. And then it happened. From the midst of the crowd, a gasp broke the silence. A woman's voice cried out, "Look!" Across the river, standing on the opposite bank, a figure appeared. She was clothed in blue, her veil trailing behind her like water, her hands outstretched. Light poured from her, soft yet strong, illuminating the ice. It was the Virgin Mary. People fell to their knees, sobbing, crossing themselves, whispering prayers through tears. Some cried aloud, "Mother of God, save us!" Others simply stared, their mouths open, unable to breathe. The Virgin lifted her hands higher, and the river seemed to pause. The waters stopped rising, the ice stilled. For a moment there was silence, an impossible, sacred silence. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried, filling every ear and every heart. "Do not mock what is holy. Care for the least of these. Repent and you will be saved." At those words, the river began to recede. The swollen waters drew back as though obeying her command. The ice broke apart gently, drifting away downstream. The danger passed before their eyes, but as she turned her gaze upon them, her face was wet with tears. "I weep for you," she said. "You forget the poor, the hungry, the homeless, yet they are mine. When you care for them, you care for me." Her words pierced every heart. Men wept openly. Women clutched their children. Even the sheriff dropped to his knees in the snow. And then the Virgin was gone. Only the wind remained, and the creak of the bridge under their feet. Margaret collapsed fully then, her body falling to the cold ground. Father Thomas caught her, tears streaking his face. Her lips moved one last time. "She did not forget me." And then her breath ceased. The woman who had been the bridge's shadow was gone. But Millbrook would never be the same. In the days that followed, silence lay over Millbrook like a shroud. People went about their lives, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. The river had receded, sparing the town. No one could explain how. Scientists who visited shook their heads. Reporters filed stories, but their words could not capture what had happened that night. Those who had seen it with their own eyes knew. It had been a miracle. Margaret was buried in the churchyard of St. Agnes. Hundreds attended her funeral, more than had ever come to any service in living memory. She was laid in a simple wooden coffin, dressed in a donated gown. At her grave, Father Thomas whispered, "She came to us homeless, forgotten, and she left us holy." Even in death, signs followed her. The morning after her burial, roses bloomed on her grave. Roses in the middle of January. People cut the blossoms and pressed them into their Bibles. The town began to change. Families opened their homes to strangers. The diner started a meal board where anyone could buy a plate for someone hungry. Children were taught not only their prayers, but kindness to the poor. Even skeptics found themselves unable to dismiss the weight of what they had seen, and every year, on January 22nd, the townsfolk gathered at the bridge. They lit candles, prayed, and sang hymns. Some swore they still saw her, the Virgin Mary watching from across the river, silent but smiling. Others said they felt her in the air, the scent of roses lingering on the cold wind. Millbrook never became rich or famous, but it became a place of faith, of compassion, of reverence for the holy. Travelers who came searching for miracles often left instead with softened hearts, changed not by spectacle, but by the simple truth spoken that night. When you care for the least of these, you care for me. And so the story of Margaret, the 72-year-old homeless woman who slept under a bridge, lived on, not as a tale of pity, but of power, the power of heaven to choose the lowliest vessel to bear its message, and the power of the Virgin to save not only a forgotten soul, but an entire town. If you listen closely by the river on a cold night, some say you can still hear her prayers, mingling with the wind, carried upward like smoke toward heaven. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please remember to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next miraculous tale.